So do you find that you get a lot of negative pushback or a lot of hate for the stuff that you talk about?
Every day, all day long. Messages, some of them are minor, just like, hey, get out of my business. This is my freedom to smoke. And other things where they're posting very graphic pictures of me that they've changed. They're not real pictures. They're saying horrible things to me. They're threatening me. Yeah, it's every day, all day long. And it's horrible.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Addiction Mindset Recovery Coaching YouTube channel. I am so excited today to have Aubrey Adams, the president and founder of everybrainmatters.org. She's also the host of the podcast, It's Just Pot, What's the Problem by Every Brain Matters. And Aubrey, I just really appreciate you taking the time to be here. I know we're going to aim to cover a host of different topics, including things like cannabinoid-induced psychosis, Delta 8 THC. Maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the predatory behaviors that we're seeing from the cannabis industry when it comes to both younger and older individuals. And just hopefully we have a great conversation today. So, Aubrey, I want to start off with asking you what made you develop or start up the non-for-profit everybrainmatters.org?
I started the nonprofit Every Brain Matters because of personal experience. I'm from Pueblo, Colorado, which is ground zero for what I call the marijuana expansion movement. And I have two family members that were harmed by the legal state products in Colorado. So witnessing the cannabis use disorder or the addiction to marijuana changed me, and I didn't realize it could be that addictive. Also, what really, really, really changed me is to see my son in cannabis-induced psychosis. That was an experience I never thought I would have. I didn't know it was happening at the time. And so I started researching the studies on it and everything, and I got mad. I got angry that this information wasn't out there and that they were calling cannabis medicine and less harmful than other drugs, because that's not what my family was experiencing. So it put me on a journey of education, learning more about addiction, the disease of addiction, and a path of recovery, not only for my son, but for myself, a family recovery. And I learned so much in the next few years that I wanted to bring the information I was learning to a broader platform and reach out to other families with this information to empower them to survive this experience and to take care of themselves through this, regardless of the outcomes, because this type of information is not, readily available throughout the country. So that is the reason why I formed this nonprofit.
That absolutely makes sense. I personally suffered from an acute episode of cannabis-induced psychosis, and it really is terrifying. And you mentioned something particularly important. Unfortunately, you guys have struggled with it, but it's not only the person that's in a state of terror when they're in psychosis, but it's also the terror that their family goes through and everyone else who's trying to support and help them in any way they can. And I definitely want to talk about resources available in a bit to families and people who might be struggling with this. The first thing I want to ask you is, so what do you think cannabis-induced psychosis is a larger scale problem? Like, we hear these instances of a family or one or two people who might have had it. Do you think this is a bigger problem than people realize?
Absolutely, 100% yes. I think it's one of the greatest crises our country is facing at this moment. Cannabis is tied to the increase in violence. It is a major, significant factor in the increase of violence, in the increase of homelessness, in the increase of the addiction drug crisis, in the increase mental illness crisis that we're seeing. I'm not saying it's the only factor, but I'm saying it is a driving factor. And people just do not understand the science of cannabis and how it can really change a person and just even change their personality, and put them in a world that's not necessarily real and full of delusions. So it can be insidious in the beginning, where you just see these subtle changes. But now that we have products that are available that are very potent, and then we have vapes that provide a fast delivery of the THC to the brain, what I call a chemical assault to the brain, we're seeing these changes of the effects of cannabis, like the psychosis that you experience, come on faster and harder. And I'm not saying that everybody who experiences psychosis, whether it's induced by cannabis or a combination of other things like trauma or other drugs, become violent. But I'm saying that the risk increases drastically when you get into that psychosis, because, like as you described, it's scary. You're reacting out of fear, and sometimes the delusions are so intense that people are self-harming, or they're harming the people around them. So yes, it is a great crisis in America right now that we are not talking enough about. So I really thank you for allowing me to be on your podcast today to raise awareness.
Oh my gosh, thank you for coming on, taking the time. You have something on everybrainmatters.org, and you have a memorial, and it's for people who have lost loved ones related to cannabis substance use disorder, many of whom it appears you have 28 people listed on there. That's 28 people that we have on your site. People always say, and they think of cannabis as, oh, someone's smoking, they're going to get the munchies, they're going to chill out. It's really not a problem. People love to say no one's ever died from weed. You can die from alcohol, you can die from other things. But your website would imply differently. Are a lot of these deaths on there related to psychotic behavior and psychosis? From what I saw, it looks like a lot of it was related to suicide. It looked like a lot of the people took their own lives. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Most of the people on my website have lost their lives from the effects of cannabis causing them to be suicidal. They would be alive if it wasn't for their cannabis use. And the people that I have on my website are just a drop in the bucket. And those are the families that I have been in contact with, and I say to them, I'm sorry for your loss. It's very painful, because even to the point before the day their loved one took their life, they lived in crisis for probably a couple years prior. So I say to them, the reason why I'm doing this memorial is to take a public stand, to let people know that cannabis can lead to ending lives. And our federal governments and our state governments do not track deaths related to marijuana. I mean, here we are 10 years into Colorado legalizing marijuana, and we still do not have accurate data. So my website is to say people do die from marijuana. When you have an industry and you have marijuana advocates out there saying they don't, you are doing a disservice to public health and safety, and you are offending our families. And we want the people on our website to not be a statistic. We want people to know that they are real people with real lives and real families, and that they matter. And we are devastated every time we get contacted by another family. And I don't do a lot of outreach because I'm so busy with what I have to do. So most of this is organically coming to me with the families contacting me. I'm not actively seeking them. I think if I was full-time actively seeking people that have died from the effects of cannabis, I would have, we would be in the thousands at this point. But so it's just a drop in the bucket, unfortunately.
Sadly, I think you'd be overly inundated with that too, just based on my own experience in social media and helping people with this stuff.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that governments and agencies are turning such a blind eye to this crisis? Because I interviewed, whom I know you know, Dr. Doug Kindred, and he was going over statistics, and they were crazy. Like CDC reports 500,000 something cases of cannabis-induced psychosis. He cited several peer-reviewed articles, like you said, connected to violence. And I know you actually, it looks like your podcast covered one that involved a church shooting, and then the young lady, I think her name was Brian, out of Bren out of California. And those are just two things. Why do you think these government agencies are turning such a blind eye to these
Money.
outcomes?
Money. Money and corruption. I think. I think they believe the industry. The industry has the money. Anybody who's selling drugs has money. Especially addictive drugs, and they have paid lobbyists that are in the faces and in the ears of legislators all day long. And there's like one or two organizations representing families or even children on this issue. So it's not a fair fight. And they want to talk about the money. They propagate that in the media. Look at all the millions, billions of dollars, but they never include the costs. What are the costs to losing that taxpayer that you would have had if their brain wasn't destroyed from cannabis? What is the cost to the family? What are the medical costs to society? What are the costs to just the mental well-being of the family members, of the people that love them, and that are in grief and not understanding how this happened, and have to live in a world that embraces marijuana as medicine when it destroyed their loved ones. So the trauma alone of this and just the money is the driving factor. The governments, federal and states, are ignoring the science, and they're ignoring the families that are speaking up. I can share with you, in my town of Pueblo, Colorado, I have spoken to our city council 3 different times. The first time, total crickets. Nobody cared with what I said. Second time, I only had one council member concerned about what I was sharing with them, and she was the one who actually invited me to present. The third time I spoke to them, I told them, I'm on Dr. Phil, and I'm speaking to lawyers now that know that they can make a lot of money from suing, bringing lawsuits to hold accountability now. And so we have class action lawsuits forming, and there will be one filed in Colorado. They were all interested in what I had to say at that point, because I told them, you have ignored me, you have ignored the other family, you are ignoring and denying the science, you're only listening to the industry. So the only way we can figure out how to change the direction of this issue is to hold you accountable with money, because that's the driving influence of this issue. It's like, you don't care about our families. You've made that very clear to us. So this is what we're going to do next. This is our next step.
It's really fascinating you say that. Not to get off topic, but a nicotine product, Juul, was one of the big vapes that hit the market early on, and a lot of kids were doing it. And it was very obvious, but no one cared, right? There was all this money coming in. No one cared until one day, a venture capitalist kid got addicted to Juul, and the guy was a multi-billionaire. And he was like, my neighbors were the founders of Juul. I'm not happy about this. And that was ultimately what started the downfall of Juul as a product, which is now kind of being reborn. But it does come down to money and really being able to hold your own ground when you do that, which is really, really sad. You said you were on Dr. Phil about this too. We'll have to find that and link that up in the video description to this. So outside of money, it sounds like you're on Dr. Phil and you've been very vocal about a lot of this stuff. Do you find that you get a lot of pushback from the cannabis industry or from people like, even if I was still consuming cannabis, my point of view would be, hey, I'm thrilled that we're airing out the dirty laundry now, so maybe we can have a smoother rollout of cannabis. What I find on my channel is people want it all hush, hush, hush. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad. And as you said, that's a public disservice. I also think it's a disservice to the people who are pro-cannabis, because one day this is just going to explode like a big can of worms. One day it will be too big not to. I'm sorry to hear that. I, to a smaller extent, know what that is like. When I launched my YouTube channel, I had maybe 100 people watching, and I had a TikTok. And within the first 3 months, we were actually working with the local FBI because of a threat that I received for making content. And mind you, my content isn't even anti-cannabis at the time. I was just saying, hey, I'm a guy that struggled with addiction. Here's some tips to quit. And it got to that level that quickly that we were working with some internet FBI stuff. It turned out to be a young kid. But going back to that, so I want to go back to psychosis and violence. What does psychosis normally look like when it comes to cannabis? It's not always violence, but what's involved? Is it delusions? What does psychosis look like? And is there a spectrum to it? Is there a progression to the psychosis? Is it always an acute thing, or can psychosis go on for a year, 2 years, 3 years? If you have any insight on that, I would love to hear.
Sure, I'd love to talk about this. Yes, it can be mild or it can be severe, and it needs to be. I mean, for the medical doctors, and I'm not a medical doctor. I worked in the medical field for 20 years, so I understand science and medical terms. But I'm a paraprofessional. I did physical therapy for a living prior to this. So psychosis is a break from reality where people can usually the first symptoms that they have is paranoia. So that is one thing. I even like it when pro marijuana podcasts ask me to come on because I want them to hear this information. I'm not here to tell people what to do and what not to do and point my finger at them and scold them or anything like that. I just want them to be informed users if they are. So if they're successfully using cannabis, like I haven't seen that, but if that's what they're claiming they are, fine. But if they're feeling paranoia, that means they need to stop. They really do need to stop because that is the progression to psychosis. So then usually paranoia comes on, then they become delusional about something. They get obsessed with some kind of conspiracy theory that they're seeing online, something political, something religious. And it can be very mild or it can be very severe. They might think they have sexual problems or something like that, and that they're this terrible person, or their neighbor is a terrible person, and they become very obsessed with it. And then the hallucinations can come on. Usually, hallucinations caused by cannabis are auditory, they're usually voices in the head, but they can be visual too. So, usually, they have to have at least 3 symptoms to be considered psychosis, and it can be very mild, where they are pleasantly kind of confused and delusional and just kind of wandering around, living inside their head, not really connecting with the outside world and relating to the outside world. Or it can be so acute and severe that they're literally ripping their clothes off, running around naked, freaking out, lashing out violently towards other people. We call it a brain on fire at that point. A lot of people will jump from like a balcony because they just want the suffering to end, or they'll jump in a body of water because they just want their suffering to end. I think there's so much inflammation going on in the brain at that point that they are just literally looking for some kind of relief at that point. So it is a spectrum. It can be mild or can be severe. And the length of time for psychosis can last just a few hours until it wears off, or it can last weeks, days, weeks, months, or years. I personally know a young man that was in it for 2 years before he stabilized, and it took some pretty strong antipsychotics to bring him out of it, and it took him a long time to detox from it. I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of people do have a long lasting psychosis from cannabis, because it's a fat soluble drug. Um, but what the science shows us too is that some people will not recover from it. It will convert to chronic psychosis, which is schizophrenic disorders. So a lot of drugs can cause psychosis, and this is one of the key points. This should be a public service announcement on billboards across America, on radio stations and TV stations and social media outlets and all that. Out of all the drugs that can cause psychosis, cannabis is the worst offender and has the highest conversion rate from those temporary symptoms of psychosis to chronic long-term psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia or bipolar with psychosis. And that alone, that information is so important that and that's why marijuana is connected to the homeless crisis, is connected to the violence crisis, because with those severe psychiatric disorders we see, that is a driving factor for them. So yeah, it's a broad spectrum.
It's incredible because you hear politicians and other people get up there and say, I want to help the mental health crisis. We got to do something for mental health. And then the CDC throws a chunk of money here, a chunk of money there, this, that. And ultimately, we've only gotten worse and worse and worse. And marijuana has become more and more and more accessible along the way. And then I don't understand. How did we get here? What's happening? You would think that it is fairly obvious, at least part of what's happening. Sure, there's other factors. So do you think that the medical community is well equipped to handle psychosis? Do you even think they're aware of cannabis substance use disorder at this point very much? And then let's say it does advance into psychosis. because from what I've gathered when I've worked with parents and families and this happens, psychosis is one thing I really don't touch, especially if the person's kind of gone, because that's what can I do on a Zoom call for that. Do you think the medical community has any idea how to manage this?
No.
That's horrible.
Yeah, no, we have families that see their kids go into psychosis, and when they get off the cannabis, they stabilize. Take them to psychiatrists, psychologists, and try to get them support and treatment. And the doctors sometimes are telling them, "Oh no, here you should be using cannabis." Even a CBD product, because we know that CBD products still have THC in them. It might be a small amount, but any THC going into that brain that has already experienced a psychotic break from cannabis is the worst thing you can do. Like, you've got to detox from it. You can never use a marijuana product again for you to have long-term recovery and healing. So yes, unfortunately, it's getting better. I'm not saying it was worse years ago. More of the medical community is more aware of it. So I don't want to say it's 100%. But we have a lot of work to do. And one of my testimonies in Ohio, after they legalized, I went to a Senate hearing and I testified. And I said, please, before you open the marijuana shops in Ohio, please have adequate detox centers for this cannabis and adequate facilities that know how to treat cannabis-induced psychosis and cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, or the addiction to marijuana, so they can recover. Please put those resources in place, because the families don't have it, and you're destroying lives.
When people ask me why I focus so heavily on cannabis, it's not only because I personally experienced it, but it's because the resources are so limited. That's what I say. If it's alcohol, if it's pills, there's a place for that. There's government-run places, state-run places, private facilities. Very, 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 very few places know how or what to do with cannabis. And you said something particularly important. People would say, oh, you can't get withdrawal from cannabis. You can't get addicted to cannabis, which is wild to me, because you have a molecule that literally binds to endocannabinoid receptors on your central nervous system that can. Alcohol's out of your body, I think, in something 4 to 7 days. Nicotine is out of your body roughly 72 hours. Maybe you can test for trace amounts of nicotine byproducts for 2 weeks. Most substances clear pretty fast. Cannabis, I've had people completely stop who have suffered from cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. That's that vomiting syndrome, for people who don't know what that is. And they're still testing positive 120 days out with what I would say is guaranteed abstinence. Like, I know with a fact, I bet my life on it, these people did not touch cannabis and they were still testing positive for it, because like you said, of how it's fat soluble. I don't think people realize that. Do you find that when people cease using cannabis with psychosis, that sometimes things get worse before they get better, or
Yeah.
does the person instantly get better?
No, usually the withdrawal, it gets way worse, and it's just so horrible. And then they're like, see, it wasn't the cannabis. And it's like, yeah, well, even when they're totally detoxed from the cannabis, their brains still have that come up. Like, the psychosis symptoms are not there. They usually go into a deep depression, and their brain still is not functioning well. And they are such high risk for suicide at that point, unaliving at that point. And I have seen loved ones, it took them 5 months to just stop testing positive for THC. 5 months. And I have seen people like a year totally out of detox and still severely depressed, severely suicidal. So it's a long-term effect. That's why, like, when I was on Dr. Phil, I'm like, I call this a chemical assault to the brain. That's exactly what it is. And we've got to start talking about this more and more. The withdrawal is serious. It won't, the good news is the withdrawal necessarily won't kill you like an alcohol withdrawal or opioid withdrawal, like instantly, but it could kill you because of such as the severe crash of the depression, and the fact that you are just living in that state of shame and not understanding what happened to you, and you feel like you can't face the world because of the behaviors you had in the psychosis. It's horrible, and the families just, there's really no pro 100% programs for them, and these people are with their families, and their families are not knowing what to do. How do we get them out of bed every day? How do we get them functioning every day when their brain is still trying to heal? So it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of love, a lot of support.
Why do you think this has gotten so much worse over the last few years? Is it stronger THC concentrations? Is it pesticides that these plants are being grown with? What do you think attributes to this happening?
Well, I think what the public needs to understand, that we did not legalize marijuana, we industrialized it. This is not marijuana. The old school hippie weed that was like 1-2% THC, it had devastating effects. And if we would have legalized, just the old weed, the old flower with the 1-3% THC, we would have problems, but not to the extent of this. The products that are on the market now are an industrialized grade, very potent, very concentrated. And so we're just dealing with a whole new a new era. I call this the new era of industrialized marijuana. And the families that I work with and the families I advocate with, we ask ourselves, how do we survive this? What are we going to do on a daily basis? Like on my notes of list today, I have just take it day by day. It's a recovery term that, I'm like, I cannot think about tomorrow because even today my loved one needs to go back into treatment, but I'm not sure if he is going to accept that. So like right now I'm doing this podcast with Dr. Frank to raise awareness, which is a healing part for me to get this out and talk about this. And I'm going to just get through today, and then I'm going to decide what I'm going to do to get through tomorrow.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite approaches. I think there's many advantages to one day at a time, right? They say like you look at Mount Everest and it's like, I don't know if I could climb that, but it's like, well, could you get like one stone? Could you get onto one stone? Yeah, I could do that. And then we'll see what you can do tomorrow. You talked about industrialized weed. So something that comes up a lot, and I got dragged through the mud when I started talking about this years ago, Delta 8 THC and these derivative hemp-derived products, whatever you want to call them. Have you seen major issues with these? Because I know I have with people. Do you have any input on that, on Delta 8, or any stories or experiences of anything you've heard about that?
Yeah, well, certainly my loved one is being harmed by the Delta 8, the Delta 10s, because he lives in a state where it's legal and he can go to any vape shop, any smoke shop, any gas station and buy all he wants. And so those products are less regulated than the Delta 9 THC products that are legalized in Colorado. And here's the thing. Colorado outlawed all those products, but they still manufacture them and sell them in different states to harm their people. And that's a lawsuit right there. They know they're worse than what they have on the market. I mean, they're worse because they're not as regulated, where there are more pesticides. There's arsenic in them. There's lead in them. But the products in Colorado have those in them, just maybe less than. There's a little bit more regulatory practices in place. But these products, these synthetic products made from CBD that are different THC variants, the Delta 8, the Delta 10, the Delta 12, there's products called HHC, are absolutely horrible. And people need to know that they have to mask those products with sugary flavors to get people to consume them. So if people took a Delta 8 THC vape to their mouth and there wasn't bubblegum flavor in it, that consumer would spit them out because they taste so toxic to the human taste, and that's the biggest deception. So they're selling them. They're selling them as medicine. They're telling veterans it's going to help them when it causes severe mental illness, addiction. And then they have to mask them with the sugary flavors to get the people to consume them. So they are worse, and they need to be outlawed at the federal level. And I'm hoping that they do that. There is a big movement to do that. But yeah, it's horrible. They're horrible.
Yeah, we see them around here. It's interesting. We have vape shops around my house, and they'll get busted for selling them, and then they'll reopen a few weeks later, keep selling them, get shut down, pay a fine, reopen again. It's the amount of people I've spoke to who have problems with Delta 8 THC is just it's unbelievable. And the more complicated part I find is when this person goes to the hospital with psychosis or cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome or whatever is happening to them. I don't even know how a doctor starts to treat that, because it's like you're trying to figure out, were you poisoned? Was it pesticides? Was it just the really high THC? Was it a combination of these things? Like, what are you even looking for to start an appropriate treatment in detox? And what are the long-term effects of inhaling these, dangerous pesticides and fungicides and things like that for years and years and years? What's that do to a person physically, mentally? I think we're starting to see what it is. You described something else, and I like the terminology that you use. You say the predatory behavior of the cannabis industry. What do you mean by that? The predatory behavior of the cannabis industry?
Well, they make products that look like normal foods, and they glamour them up to look like candies to attract the younger generation. That's a predatory practice. That's a purposeful predatory practice that they do, because they say, oh, we don't want kids to use our products. And I disagree with that. They want lifetime users, just like the tobacco industry wanted. So they put them in normal looking foods to deceive the consumer. They mask them with sugary flavors to also deceive the consumer. They know how toxic their products truly are, and they don't want the consumer to taste them. Their predatory practices also are they lie. They call it medicine when it is not medicine. They lie and they say it's less harmful than other drugs. So they create this drug bias in our country that people are like, well, I've been in recovery groups that say, then I go in and I start talking about my loved one using cannabis, and they're like, well, at least it's not opioids, and I'm like, well, my son, he's psychotic from this, and this is horrible, and so they create the stigma, this drug bias, and that you're less than and you are not as important if your loved one is harmed by cannabis. And so those are just a few of their predatory practices. That it's less harmful, that it's medicine. They put it in normal foods, and they mask them with sugary flavors to deceive the consumer.
One of the things that blows my mind, and I think this is the same thing too. I had a gentleman in one of our groups, and he was showing me the emails that he got from his medical dispensary. And it was like, get high as a kite with these savings, 45% off today's, flash deal on, OG God's cannabis or whatever. And I said to him, imagine if Purdue or an opioid company got caught sending out emails saying, get high as a kite with our discounts. That is not medicine. That is not how you administer something. And I've never had a medical card. I don't know anything about medical marijuana or how that works. But when I talk to my patients as a chiropractor who have a medical cannabis card or marijuana card, a lot of them say, I get the script. I go to a dispensary. There's a college kid working there. He kind of talks to me about a few things, tells me these different strains and options, and then I'm out the door with whatever. Like, that's, from what I gather here in New York, that's currently how it's working. That's a very different experience than going to get a prescription. And look, I'm a chiropractor, you're a physical therapist. Like, I'm not Mr. Pharmaceutical here, okay, right? But like, that's very different than going to get a prescription, seeing a pharmacist in a regulated pharmacy, and then walking away with that medication. Those are two crazy different experiences. So I think that's extremely predatory, to be taking advantage of people in email lists and social media blasts like that. There's a reason why they don't let opioid companies or painkiller companies do that. And if marijuana really is, in my opinion, this crazy good pain reliever, which it's in literature being proven not to be, very similar to how Oxy was proven not to be because of its impact on lowering dopamine over time and all that. But like, they should not be allowed to do that. They should have the exact same restrictions that other pharmaceutical grade medications have, if that's the case. So I always found that to be very predatory. And I don't know, do you mind, how old is your son? Is that okay for me to ask? How old is your son?
He's 24 now.
24. So I work in the high schools. I was still struggling at the age of 24 in college with this. It is crazy how these dealers and social media sites prey on high schoolers with this. People think vaping nicotine is a problem. It's a problem. It is nothing in comparison to what's going on with cannabis. Now that I'm on that tangent, do you feel that there's any chance that school-related violence and school shootings could be correlated to cannabis consumption?
100%. I bet you it's the main factor.
I was talking to Dr. Doug Kindred on this, and we'll link that interview below. And he had some really good research articles actually pointing that out. And that's one of my biggest concerns when I'm working in the high schools, not only for my own safety, but for like the safety of these kids and the faculty and the people. And there are so many kids that are just high from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, and they're suicidal, and they're completely out of emotional balance. And yes, some of them have very challenging family lives, but a lot of them are okay outside of the fact that it's like, oh, hey, you got this one common denominator here, and it seems to be cannabis. Okay. So do you support medical cannabis or legalization in any capacity? Or do you see any, I should ask you a different way. Do you see any benefit to legalization or medical cannabis in any capacity?
Not anymore. I voted yes for medical marijuana here in Colorado because at the time when they were passing that, I was like, it's none of my business. Like, if somebody feels like they're getting help, if they're in the process of dying, like, give them whatever is going to help. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's just none of my business. But our medical marijuana program is worse than our recreational marijuana program here in Colorado. It's a more predatory driven industry. 18-year-olds can get large amounts of THC through edibles and the flower, not necessarily through the concentrates anymore. We did pass a law here to decrease that. No, I am at the point where if you're going to call it medicine, then you have to get it approved with the FDA, period. And I do support, like, I mean, they have FDA approved medications like Marinol and Epidiolex. And so there's just no need to pass any policies for medical marijuana at the time. The industry has proved that they are predators. They have proved that they're not following the science. They have proven that they are here to deceive and make money. And they have taken advantage of vulnerable populations like the veterans, like young people. Like people of color in poor communities. They have, to me, these policies are racist. I mean, I'm not afraid to say that anymore. And if, as you could see in the last presidential election, it was such a power move for both candidates that it made me want to vomit. You know, it really did. Like, having access to more marijuana products in disadvantaged communities with disadvantaged populations is the last thing they need to be helpful. I mean, the marijuana causes such severe mental illness. I mean, we are talking about the psychosis, which is the worst end of the spectrum, the worst thing that can be caused by cannabis, but just the underlying, like, I don't feel right. I'm full of anxiety. I have low self-esteem because I'm living in this delusional world. And it literally dehumanizes people where they don't feel comfortable in their own skin. And imagine going day by day and having just that severe low self-esteem, being told you're less than, but thinking you have to consistently toke on a vape all day long to function. It's history repeating itself, and it's worse than the tobacco industry did at this point. And we need elected officials to take a stand on this and protect the health and safety of Americans. And they're not doing it.
I could not agree more with you on that. And I was not always that way. I actually, one thing I tend to be a little more liberal in is my drug outlook. I let people do what they want. I don't care. You know, as long as it's not impacting me or impacting other people, but it is impacting other people now. And my view on that changed once I started working more in the schools, and I got more concerned about the correlation to violence. Because I was like, if this kid or this young adult snaps and it's due to cannabis and a lot of people get hurt because of it, well, guess what? Now it is hurting a lot of other people. And you could say the same for alcohol and other drugs too. So yeah, my stance on that has changed somewhat. Now, what resources are out there and available for families that are going through this that you would want to share for people? We have everybrainmatters.org. We have the It's Just Pot podcast, which will link all this stuff in the pinned comments and links and video description. What other resources are out there for people?
Well, if you're a user being affected by marijuana, I would definitely recommend Marijuana Anonymous and try those meetings and get connected in those communities. I've met a lot of the members. We've had conventions with them, and they are more of a progressive 12-step program. And I'm really impressed with the work and the community that they are building. So that's a resource I would recommend. I would also recommend if you're a family affected by a loved one's marijuana use to look into Maranon. It's MAR-ANON. And those are 12-step support groups for family members to work their own program and to be connected with other families that are impacted by a loved one's marijuana use. We have that, like I run a meeting every Saturday morning for families, mostly that have loved ones with cannabis use disorder and cannabis-induced psychosis, but there's a lot of growing people there that have loved ones with CHS, or the Cannabinoid Hyperemesis Syndrome, the vomiting syndrome, where they're at toxic levels of marijuana. And I think in that program, we have like 12 meetings a week. Tonight on my platform, Every Brain Matters, we have a speakers meeting the second Wednesday of every month. And then all the other Wednesdays, we have a professional counselor lead us in an open discussion. And then we draw strength from each other, and learn how to hold healthy, loving boundaries and take care of ourselves and stuff. But like tonight, we have a special speaker of a mom that I've just been inspired by and draw a lot of strength. Her son is very sick, and she's really leaned on her faith, and she's really leaned on just the spiritual part of this to give that part that she can't control to her higher power, as she defines her higher power. Focus on herself, her own mental and physical well-being, exercises. She likes to dance and be engaged with the world, continue her profession. And so, like, when you watch people do that, it's like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it too. And I can continue to show up as healthy as I can for my loved ones. So those are the two main resources: Marijuana Anonymous, or Maranon, or Every Brain Matters when it comes to cannabis problems. In Every Brain Matters, we are growing more resources too. We do have a meeting, actually the second Wednesday of every month. It'll happen today in just a few hours, led by a professional, Doug Dolan. And these are for users who are recovering from cannabis use disorder, cannabis-induced psychosis, or cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. It's an action-based group therapy where he gives assignments. The members do need to either be sober or actively trying to get sober to join. We can't have somebody coming in who's active in their addiction. We're trying to build a group to really draw strength from one another, because most of the people that attend that meeting, they're living in so much shame they don't even turn on their video at this point, and we're okay with that. Like, meet them where they're at, and then let's see what we can do to help you. And as I get more donations and figure out how to get more grant money, I will continue to build those resources for the community and help any way I can,
Yeah, I really commend you on that too, and I hope people watching this will put your donation link there, because I can tell you, I don't know how much work you've done, but I imagine it's a lot, because I've looked into doing a non-for-profit for this. People see me on here and I have supplements and things, and Dr. Frank, and he's got all this money, and this, I tell people, this does not make me a lot of money. It makes me very little, and I get it from working with people. I have private services that I charge for, and some products and some things. And I've looked into getting grants, and they said, look, go after nicotine, go after tobacco, because you have the master settlement fund, and there's billions of dollars that we can give you in there if you want to set something up, and we can start to support you. Not give me billions, but they're like, we could pay your non-for-profit from that. With cannabis, there's not a lot of that out there. And it's just interesting that you brought this up, because that was always on my, when I actually saw that you guys were a non-for-profit, I was like, how in the world did Aubrey pull this off? Because I looked into it and it was nearly impossible. So I just congratulate you and commend you, because I imagine it's been a lot of a big process. And I would encourage anyone watching us to please, guys, click her link and donate, because this is so important. And you need money. As going back to the beginning of our conversation, sometimes you need attorneys and you need money to make things happen, right? Even for us to shoot this video, this is your time and my time, and that can cost money. So kudos. Yeah, it's really
Thank you.
impressive. It's
I really
super impressive.
I really appreciate the support. And I feel like I've just been very lucky, but I also have put myself on the front lines of this issue, which is a very uncomfortable place to be, a very abusive place to be at many times. And I think I'm just so ticked off enough that, when I get another family calling me for help, I share with them a couple of resources to get them trying to go down the right path. And I don't block any resources. I'm not in competition with other nonprofits or any resources. When we say every brain matters, we mean every. I have found out in the nonprofit world, there's a lot of competition and egos. And I think because I have the attitude, like, I'm not in it for me. I'm in it to help the families, and I will continue to do the best I can. So far, I have been very blessed, but I volunteered for years too. So I hope next year is not guaranteed for me. I have enough grant money to get me through another year, but then I don't know if my grantors and my donors are going to continue to support me, or if I can even grow that. And I'm trying to build a community where, like, I'm the content creator, I'm the everything, I'm the social media person. I'm doing a job of 3 full-time people. But really, as the director and the founder of Every Brain Matters, my focus needs to be raising money almost 100% of the time to keep us going. And I don't have that time. So I appreciate you
That's
promoting this.
interesting. I wonder if we'll talk more in the future, because, like I said, I would like some involvement in that space in the future, and maybe there's a area where we could help each other out with that. From one side or another, we'll see what it all holds. Yeah, of course, though. Anytime. Okay, Aubrey, is there anything else that you want to leave people with? Anything else?
Well, follow our newsletter, sign up for our monthly newsletter, because you'll get the latest updates. One of the things that we're doing right now is, you had mentioned Bryn Spacer, from Thousand Oaks, California, had a psychotic break. She was she was a naive user and took a large hit off a marijuana bong, a hit that was stacked with a lot of THC smoke, and had a acute full psychotic break from cannabis, and ended up taking the life of her friend, stabbing her dog, and she was ending her life when the police came on scene. She would not be here if it wasn't for the police intervention at that time. And so she was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, reduced from murder 1 to involuntary manslaughter because of influence, because it was a cannabis-induced psychosis that they caught on camera. And all the experts on the defense and the prosecution team all concluded that it was a cannabis-induced psychosis. So it was 100%. There was no other factors involved. Like with some other stories, there's a lot of factors. And the judge had pity on her. He did not send her to jail, even though prison, which she thought she was going. She was preparing to go to prison, and gave one of her requirements is she has to provide 100 public community hours of what is cannabis-induced psychosis. So look for that with us, because we approached her and her probation officers. We had advocates in the courtroom, because we know, like how Dr. Frank has said, that marijuana is a significant factor in a lot of violence. So we really wanted to know for ourselves if this story was true, and it is. And so when she was given the judgment and the sentencing, we approached her and her probation officers and said, hey, we are a nonprofit and we understand what cannabis-induced psychosis is, and we want to support Bryn in providing this critical life-saving education, but we're not sure how she can continue to do it without traumatizing herself over and over again. So we're creating a video with her and a presentation to kind of help her manage that, so she can still survive what she did that night, and so we can bring hope to other people that have had violent behaviors because of their cannabis-induced psychosis, too. We want to give hope back to those people, and we're proud of Bryn surviving this. Our hearts and our condolences are with the Chad O'Malley family, and then we understand that this is just a devastating situation. But some people accuse us that we were part of her sentencing or anything like that. We had nothing to do with it, but and that they think she's a spokesperson for Every Brain Matters. That is not the truth. We have been approved by her probation officers to help her achieve these community hours of public education on cannabis-induced psychosis. We have to report to them on a monthly basis of what we are specifically doing with her, and to make sure that we're not profiting and nobody else is profiting off her story. And so look for that with us, because this is a story that will really inform the public about the potential and the harms of cannabis. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Of course, I remember when that came out, it was like heartbreaking, and I was very confused until more recently being in touch with you guys and other people who have shed some light on that. It's horrific, and I hope more stuff like this doesn't happen. Although, unfortunately, it will happen until enough of it happens, and then it happens to the wrong person. Unfortunately, like a politician's kid or someone with a big bankroll who then gets mad, kind of going back to my Jewel example, and then you see change. But until then, whatever, hands off. We're all making our money, so they don't care. It's horrible. Aubrey, I hope to have you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And everyone, we linked anything we talked about, links in the pinned comment, links in the video description. Okay, guys. Aubrey, thank you very much.
Thank you.